Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Friday Ramblings. We're here with a whole new fun time adventure as we get into a little bit of convoluted history surrounding a game series that is kind of surprising that it's a series because, while everybody and their grandmother knows the first game, not a lot of people are nearly as familiar with the various sequels and spin-offs. That's right, folks, we're going to break down the surprisingly thick history of Bubble Bobble. Bubble, 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 bubble. La 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 la. So let's break down things real quick with your super corporate tech know-how. And Bubble Bobble is a 1986 platform arcade game developed and published by Taito, distributed in the United States by Romstar and in Europe by Electrocoin. Bubble Bobble was designed by Fukio Mitsuji and was released in 1986. Besides being on arcades, it was also ported through pretty much every console worth having, sometimes in re-release remakes and reboots. But real quick, besides the original arcade version, we also had the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Amiga, the Atari ST, the Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum, Amstrad CPC, Game Boy, Game Gear, the Sharp X68000, Game Boy Color, Sega Master System, Sega Saturn, and the PlayStation. As I said, some of those, especially the last couple entries there, were remake remasters, enhanced re-releases, but it's still Bubble Bobble. So what is Bubble Bobble? Well, very simple. You got a bad guy. He kidnapped your girlfriends. He turned you into dragons. But you're not crazy, scary, fire-breathing dragons. You are super cute bubble-shooting dragons. But these are not just your average children's bubbles. These bubbles, when they hit enemies, will capture the enemy inside the bubble. And then you pop the bubble, and the bad guy turns into super cool bonus item. Either some sort of jewel, gem type thing, or food. Because we all love food. Gotta get the food. And that's the basic point of the game. You enter a level, you bubble the bad guys, you pop those bubbles, you collect the bonus point items, and you go to the next level. Seems simple? Well, see, here's the problem. Each level gets crazier as, besides the enemies slowly and eventually getting faster and there being more of them, the layout of the levels will get really crazy. Now, these being classic 80s arcade game, each level is a single screen and is basically built like a modified maze, which means you have to occasionally sneak up on and ambush creatures in order to get them. The bad news is, when you get down to one enemy, that final enemy will go super angry and be extra hard to capture, and if you take too long, the evil white whale looking specter of death will come for you. That's right, there's not an official timer on the levels, but the game does encourage you to finish it as quick as possible and will punish you for stalling and messing around. Still think that's easy? Okay, well, here's the big thing. You want to beat it? You got to go through 100 levels. That's right. 100 levels of escalating insanity. It's like this. Everybody I know played Bubble Bobble. And even though, especially the NES port, which is the main version I played, because that's what everybody owned, the Nintendo, had passwords and infinite continues, those later levels, pretty much anything past 50, was incredibly hard. As I said, with those maze-like structure to the levels and the fact that enemies will tend to want to avoid being turned into bubbles, and that you also have to pop the bubbles, which, being bubbles, will tend to float away from you, not just like hang out, chill. Those later levels become a madcap, high-paced chase and dodge sequence type gameplay. Now the good news is it is two-player and it is co-op, which means both of you play at the same time and cannot harm each other, which allows you to basically split the board in half. This, as I said before, everybody played Bubble Bobble. A lot of people on the NES port, a lot of people on the arcades, but everybody played it. It was one of the iconic games of the 80s and makes a lot of people's lists of greatest games of all time. This game did huge business for Taito. So naturally, they made sequels. Now, while a lot of the sequels did find major audiences, most of them never achieved the video game culture immersion that Bubble Bobble did. Mostly because Bubble Bobble was so different from anything done at the time, and as such, it grabbed everybody's attention. Gameplay is incredibly easy to figure out. The difficulty scales on a fair but constantly progressing upward level, and nobody could really yell at it for violence because you're trapping monsters in bubbles and popping the bubbles to turn them into food. It's about as unviolent as a video game can get, so nobody really got upset at it. In short, it was a masterwork of genius in everything a video game should be. Easy to figure out, hard to master, and approachable by all ages. Now, the other problem with the sequels, which we're going to touch on in just a second, is that Taito decided to vary the formula up because, I mean, you stick too close to form, what can you do? Just make more levels. You know, not quite what Taito wanted to do. So they took a gamble in that the next few sequels were not simply called Bubble Bobble 2, Bubble Bobble 3. No, they had completely different names, which means you kind of had to pay attention and look at the advertisements to realize that these games were actually direct sequels to Bubble Bobble. So, let's break it down. This is where things get fun. The first sequel was released in 1987, only a year later, because that is how quickly Bubble Bobble took off, and was called Rainbow Islands. Now, they did officially fully title it as Rainbow Islands, the story of Bubble Bobble 2, to make it a little easier for people to understand, but most people just saw the main logo that said Rainbow Islands. Now, you are playing the same characters, your Bubble Dragon buddies, Bub and Bob, or Bubblin' and Bobblin', depending on what region of the world you're playing in. However, this time they are in their original human forms, which, if you achieve the arcade game's best ending, is what you saw. That you were returned to your human forms, so you could chill with your girlfriends. Unlike the first game, while it is technically two-player, it was not co-op. It was players taking turns, similar to like your early Mario Brothers games. So, what was Rainbow Islands all about? Why wasn't it just called Bubble Bobble 2? Well, simply put, it was not all about shooting bubbles. This time, the players release rainbows that act as both weapons, makeshift platforms, and item collectors, hence Rainbow Islands. You toss out your rainbows, which damage any enemies that get caught in the way, as well as acquiring any items that the rainbows come in contact with, thus saving you from actually having to physically run up to them. Now, when jumped upon, the rainbows do fall down, allowing them to defeat any enemies directly below them. Power-ups will increase the player's speed, the speed of the rainbows, and how many are spawned at once. If players take too long in a level, water will start to rise up from the bottom of the stage and will kill the player character if it rises above his head. Similar to the first game, where you are encouraged to make steady progress. Now, like Bubble before, the game does have multiple endings, but as I said, unlike the first game, Rainbow Islands, the levels are much more visually filled out and fleshed out, and there are more things going on. Basically, it feels more like a classic platformer than Bobble, which was kind of a platformer puzzle hybrid game, which is all good. Rainbow Islands has a strong cult following and was released across pretty much every system that the original Bubble was released in back in the 80s. It is not seen as quite as much re-release in modern times, but yes, you did have the arcade. You had the Commodore 64, the ZX Spectrum, the Amstrad, Atari ST, the Amiga, NES, the Master System, PC Engine CD, the Game Boy Color, Sega Saturn, the Mega Drive, the PlayStation. There has been a mobile re-release version, you know. So, it's one of those games that not everybody played, but the people that did give it a shot tend to love the game. Now, like Bubble before, the game has multiple endings. To get the true and happy ending, aka the canon ending for you hardcore fans that love your slang, player must find and complete the 3 secret islands. These islands are not visible until all 7 big diamonds are collected. To get the big diamond, the player must collect 7 different colored small diamonds on the island and finish the round. After collecting the small diamonds, the word nice appears. If the small diamonds are collected in the correct order, the player will get to a secret room at the end of each island, which contains a permanent power-up. And this ultimately does... It introduces one of the plot elements that I dislike about modern 3D generation-era platformers. And that is where... You know, the idea of a platformer was originally to just get from point A to point B. All good. Don't let the enemies beat you up. Get to the goal. Sometimes, depending on the game, like Rainbow Island, progress tended to be made kind of upwards in a lot of levels. The problem, though, is when you introduce elements that seem optional at first, but end up becoming more essential as you play the game. As I said, to get the true ending, it has nothing to do with how well you avoid dying or even getting hit. Doesn't matter how fast you complete the level, you have to item scavenger hunt. This annoys me. Because it feels like the game is punishing you for not going for this 100% mastery concept, but at the same time, it also wants you to, as we indicated earlier, beat the levels quickly. Yes, there is such a thing for hardcore players to have more challenging goals. The original Super Mario Brothers, when you beat the game, loads up a second go-round of the levels where the enemies are swapped up so that they are harder to avoid and beat. Same thing with things like the original Legend of Zelda, where you could play a second quest, which has been repeated in many later Zelda games, where various things in the game are tweaked to provide a more challenging gameplay. That's one thing. But to flat out say, hey, you beat this entire game without dying. You beat it like super mind-boggling quick. You still don't get the good ending. That just blows my mind. It's like if you wanted the game to be about the scavenger hunt, then say that you don't finish the level till you get the scavenger hunt items. Don't say, well, you finish the level by getting to the goal, but you don't really finish the level, because if that's all you do, you won't get the good ending. You won't get the full sense of accomplishment. It's kind of nonsense. It's like, pick the point of the game. But I digress. That's a personal beef with me. You know. But, as I said, Rainbow Islands is a very strong following among those who did play the game. It is not the icon that Bobble is, but it is a very strong, highly respected sequel. So, you know, props to Rainbow Islands. I'm not a big fan of that true ending mechanic. That's just me. I'm trying not to get too rant happy and negative, because that's not what we do on this show. There was a modified version put out in limited qualities in the arcade called the Extra version, where certain stage enemies and bosses appear in different orders, allowing you to have a modified expert version, essentially, for people that had already mastered the original arcade version. Nothing really wrong with that, but it's a thing. About the only other major thing to talk about Rainbow Islands is the music. See, the original arcade game contained in-game music highly reminiscent of the song Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz. Cute pun. The song was included in the Japanese Mega Drive and Famicom releases of the game, as well as the Ocean Software home computer ports for the Amstrad, Spectrum, Commodore 64, Amiga, and Atari ST. However, in the later console versions of the game and the Japanese Taito Memories and the International Taito Legends collections, aside from part of the chorus, the in-game music was changed so as not to infringe copyright. So, depending on which version of Rainbow Islands you play, you may or may not hear that puntastic, highly culturally recognized Over the Rainbow theme song. So, because Rainbow Islands sold reasonably well, not reasonably well, very well, we got the story of Bobble 3. This time, though, it is now called Parasol Stars. I told you this gets complicated, and was released in 1991. Now, this one did not get an arcade port. It was only done for home releases. This will be significant for what we're going to talk about in a few minutes with some of the other games. You are still the human character versions, like seen in Rainbow Islands. However, the gameplay has a lot more to do with Bobble single screen level feel than Rainbow Islands. You play on multiple worlds, each world featuring 7 rounds, the last one always hosting a boss that must be defeated to progress to the next world. There are 8 main worlds. However, in order to complete the game properly, here we go again. The player must open a secret door on the final world by collecting 3 of the star items, allowing access to 2 secret worlds themed around Bubble Bobble and Check and Pop, which was a different Taito game from 1984 that are not initially visible on the main screen. Completing these two lead to the real final boss, Chaos Stick-On, and the true ending. Now, as the name Parasol Stars would imply, this time the player is armed with a parasol instead of bubbles or rainbows that is normally closed. However, the player can deploy it in two ways, opening it in front of them or above the head. This allows it to function as a shield, stun enemies, capture droplets, or hurl enemies, as well as an occasional makeshift parachute. As I said, the rounds are arranged similar to Puzzle Bobble, where it is a random layout of platforms that you have to run around beating the enemies. Now, Parasol Stars did not sell quite as good as Rainbow Islands or Bubble Bobble. The game was released in limited quantities in North America. The ZX Spectrum port was planned but later canceled. And local distributor Ocean initially explained that the developer's computer was stolen in a burglary for those two ports, the Spectrum and Commodore 64, but it was later revealed the game was scrapped after the freelance developer's wife destroyed said computer in a drunken rage, along with the backups of the work. The compilation release, Bubble Bobble, featuring Rainbow Islands for the Sega Saturn, Sony PlayStation, and PC, was originally going to include Parasol Stars as well, but it was dropped from the lineup mid-development. Now, much like Rainbow Islands used the Wizard of Oz's song Somewhere Over the Rainbow, Parasol Stars used an official song in its soundtrack. This time it was Lambada by the French-Brazilian pop group Kaoma, which was used as the game's boss theme. The game was highly rated, although ultimately, due to its limited release, it not being in arcades, as well as missing a couple of those ports due to domestic issues, the game is not well known or recognized unless you are a major Bubble Bobble fan or just a hardcore gamer. This means that we are basically starting to hit the doldrums of the franchise, the point where the games are mostly now getting sold to embedded fans instead of growing the fan base. This is why ultimately, as I said before, everybody knew Bubble Bobble, but everybody played Bubble Bobble. However, Rainbow Islands, respectable, but not quite as high up there. And then Parasol Stars was like, well, yeah, I think I heard of that game. I saw it in some magazines. Seemed to get good ratings. You know, you had to go out of your way to look for Parasol Stars. It was not everywhere like Bubble Bobble was, and as well as Rainbow Islands. But, you know, that was a business decision. That's not to say the game is bad. It's a very enjoyable game. Doing a layout similar to Bubble Bobble gives it a bit of a, you know, nostalgic feel, and would certainly make it a better sequel for people that have obsessively played Bubble Bobble but never got to Rainbow Islands, as the mechanics are closer to Bubble Bobble than Rainbow Islands. So, you know, if you are looking for a sequel and you come across it, I would give it a good shot. All respect to things. Now here's where we get a lot of fun. Released in 1993 for the NES and the Game Boy, we have Bubble Bobble Part 2. Now, this time, Bub and Bob are back to their Bubble Dragon forms. This game is basically treated as a direct sequel, as it maintains a lot of the same mechanics and stage layout, as well as, stated a moment ago, returning Bub and Bob to their Bubble Dragon forms. Now this is where we get really obscure. It was only put out on Nintendo's 2 consoles at the time, and as such was even harder to get in the fans of casual gamer, or in the hands of casual gamers. Only the hardcore fans were going to be hunting it down. Good news is, as we said before, if you are a Bubble Bobble addict and want more than that 100 levels, well, then this is the game that will fill that addict niche. You will be happy because it is a direct sequel. It is the mechanics. It is the visuals. Yes, there is improvement in the level design. There's more visually striking backgrounds, kind of like Rainbow Islands and Parasol Stars, but it does harken back to the single screen level design of Bubble Bobble. Very nostalgic for those people that are like that. Now, they did remove the co-op style of playing from the original Bubble Bobble, but otherwise it plays highly similar. Now we're really getting fun here, folks. So we had Rainbow Islands, the story of Bubble Bobble 2. We had Bubble Bobble Part 2. So what do you make next? Well, we kind of want to stick to that whole Bub and Bob, dragons shooting bubbles at people formula. How about Bubble Bobble Part 3? No! That would make sense. Nope. This is Bubble Symphony, aka Bubble Bobble 2, as this was the arcade direct sequel and was released in 1994. It would eventually see release on the Sega Saturn as well. This time, the Bubble Dragon boys are joined by 2 females, Kululun and Koruron. However, despite the fact that Bubblin' and Bobblin's names and likenesses are the same, these are stated to be the children of the Bub and Bob of the first game. Otherwise, the game is pretty much a direct sequel as far as your game mechanics go. You encounter bosses a little more often than the original game, similar to Bubble Bobble Part 2. The game has more visually striking levels, and there is a branching route through the levels by selecting one of 2 doors after every boss, as well as charging the bubble shot, allowing you to blow 3 bubbles at once. Thus, it's all good. It is an enhancement of the original game, taking everything that worked in that game and taking things up a notch. However, with no home releases and it being released only in arcades, eventually the Saturn in '97, but getting completely away from Nintendo, which had been a home for every other Bubble Bobble game at this point, you now have some really small audience imprint. Now, it was included in the Taito Legends 2 compilation for Microsoft Windows in North America and Europe. However, that's pretty much it. It was almost unheard of in North America. It was basically done primarily for the Japanese audiences. So, if you've played Bubble Symphony, you either found yourself a after-the-fact ROM, or you have spent time in Japan. Either way, more power to you. This brings us to Bubble Memories, the story of Bubble Bobble 3, which was released to arcades in February '96. Now, unlike Bubble Symphony, we go back to the original two Bub and Bob Dragons. It was released in 2007 for PlayStation 2, but again, only in Japan, as part of their Taito Memories 2 Volume 1 compilation. It was released in Europe in '96 for the arcade, but no North American release. Basics of the game, though, is like the other core Bubble Bobble games. Here's Bubble Dragons. You progress through a series of single-screen levels. You blow the bubbles, you pop the bubbles, you try not to get destroyed by the enemies. It does introduce giant enemies on some levels, and modifies the charge-up thing with giant bubbles, which are essential for beating those giant enemies. There are a total of 80 levels. However, the last 10 levels can only be accessed by collecting 7 potions. Once again, annoying me with that. It doesn't matter if you beat every level, you still don't get to play every level because you didn't do the item collecting scavenger hunt stuff. Don't want to collect potions. I want to blow bubbles and trap the enemy in the bubbles and then pop the bubbles so the enemies become cool food I can eat. I feel awesome about myself. Don't want to collect your potions. I don't like the potion collecting. If I beat the other levels, I should get to play the last levels. It's tricky. It's sneaky. Personal annoyance. So that brings us to our last entry in the main series, which is Rainbow Islands Towering Adventure, which came out in 2009 for the WiiWare and Xbox Live Arcade in Japan, Europe, and North America. Yay, North America finally gets some games. Woo! Now, this one is done more with more of a single-player emphasis. And instead of health or a set number of lives, the game uses a time limit, which ends the game if it reaches 0. Getting hit by enemies will lose valuable seconds, but defeating enemies with rainbows will sprout forth gems that can replenish time. By defeating multiple enemies in a row, more valuable gems with bigger time bonuses are awarded, forcing you to think somewhat strategically. Certain points of the game, evil Dr. Crescent will attack from below in one of his machines. Players can either try to defeat him or evade him until the next checkpoint. And by collecting 7 colored gems, the player can use a special attack against these mini bosses, which is certainly a lot better than needing to collect them to get the real ending of the game or to access the final levels. An improvement. Now, ultimately, the game is for Rainbow Island fans. It is not a stellar game, but if you are a fan of Rainbow Islands and Parasol Stars, you will enjoy Towering Adventure. Before we get off, though, I know you people that are really big into all things Bobble, you got an itch in the back of your brain. Oh, you got a twitch in that finger. You're ready to post something. You're going to say, hey, you didn't mention something. You didn't mention something. That's because I'm saving it for last, because it's going to be a super Cliff Notes version. Why? Because this is a spin-off that can actually sustain its own ramblings and will in the future. The most successful sequel spin-off continuation of the original Bobble was Puzzle Bobble, also known as Bust a Move in many countries, which is a tile-matching puzzle arcade game that was originally released in 1994. Now, you have played this game. I guarantee you have played this game. Even if you did not have it be called Puzzle Bobble, even if you did not have it be called Bust a Move, you have played this game. Because it has been cloned 1,000 times over, especially in the mobile game market. See if this sounds familiar. You have a bunch of circular shaped items of different colors at the top of the stage. At the bottom of the stage you have a character of some sort, usually a cute, cartoony type character, who can toss one bubble at a time upwards. And if it's a bubble that matches the same color as a bubble up there, when it makes impact, the bubbles in that little area, boop! Yeah, you've played that game. It's been skinned and cloned out 1,000 different ways by a ton of different people. Because it is brilliant. There's basically 3 puzzly games for the video game industry that everything else is spawned off of. This is Tetris, Puzzle Bobble, and Columns. Everything else, it's most likely a derivative of one of those 3. Tetris, pieces fall down one at a time, and you gotta line them up with no gaps. Puzzle Bobble, you get a whole wall from above that will eventually start coming down to squash you if you don't pop it, and pop it all. And then Columns, where you'll get stacks of 3, and you arrange them within, you shuffle them around within that stack of 3 to make larger sets. That's it. Okay, you do have the match 3s where you have the full level thing. But I'm sorry, to me, that's still kind of more like a spin-off cousin of the Columns thing. Because that was the point of Columns, was to match 3, because in any 3 set that would fall, they'd be different gems. Match 3, instead of falling, it's just one big screen at first that keeps itself full. Otherwise, it's still just Columns. It's a farther derivative, it's not a straight clone, but you can still trace match 3 games back to Columns. But we are talking about Puzzle Bobble. As I said, Puzzle Bobble has seen a lot of skins, it's seen a lot of clones, it's even had some direct shooters, or excuse me, direct sequels. Blah, blah, blah. Such as Puzzle Bobble 2, 3, 4, Psychic Force Puzzle Taison, Puzzle Bobble Mini, Super Puzzle Bobble, Super Puzzle Bobble 2, Super Puzzle Bobble Millennium, DS, Bash, Space, plus New Universe. It's all out there. As I said, these games we can discuss in depth in another rambling, because if I compiled a whole list of games that have reskinned and cloned Puzzle Bobble, we would be here all day. Ultimately, what it's going to come down to, I know I'm starting to lean into a longer rambling here, but that was a lot of games to cover. Play the original Bobble. Everybody should play it. Every age, every generation. It is so zen. It is lovely. It is a true masterpiece of gaming. If you want something a little more puzzle-based, go for Puzzle Bobble. It might be called Bust a Move in your part of the world, but grab it as well. The original game is one of the icons of the puzzle genre. After that, look, Rainbow Islands was solid, just didn't quite get the immersion the original did. Parasol Stars is a perfectly good sequel. If you're still really jonesing for Bub and Bob, go for that. Otherwise, the direct Bubble Bobble sequels, they're nice, but again, it's a lot of what Taito originally tried to avoid by going down the Rainbow Islands route, which was just putting a new wrapper on the same mechanics. You know, you can track them down. They're not horrible games. You're not going to regret playing them, but they're really more for the hardcore Bubble Bobble addicts. If you want to see Taito at its best, stick to the big three. Bubble, Puzzle, Rainbow Islands. That's your big three. All of those are highly recommended. For now, though, I'm going to sign off because I don't want to take up your whole Friday. And if you're not watching the Friday Ramblings on Friday, hey, I appreciate you watching anyway, but I encourage you to hit that subscribe button. Hit that subscribe button. Hit a like. Drop a comment. And watch your notifications so every time a new rambling drops, or more importantly, one of the other great shows we have here at Roulette Productions, you will be aware of it and can watch it as soon as possible. Joy! Because what better way to start your weekend than some positive ramblings? Discussing of all things entertainment without just making creators feel bad. You know, Taito released 3 incredible games. Managed sequels that were respectable sequels in their own right. And did it all with the simple idea of, hey, what if we had a couple dragons, spit some bubbles at some monsters, save their loves, you know, could be fun. And that's all you need in life. A good hook to lead to a fun adventure. I'll see you in 7, folks. Take it easy.